dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, as always, Mark Angelides. On today's special edition, we are talking the economy. Zohran Mamdani, Joe Rogan, and the K-shaped economy, and much more. It's quite the in-depth show coming up. Please remember, Liberty Nation Radio, sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Hello and welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides, and we're joined today by Liberty Nation's Economics Affairs Editor, the economics guru, the man who knows perhaps even more than Jerome Powell himself. Take that in any way you wish, Andrew. Andrew Moran, thanks for being here, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So, Andrew, we decided to do an economics special today, and I wanted to kick this off with what I consider, it's a bit more political than economics, but Zohran Mamdani, when he won the election day, and he gave his victory speech, and he said these words, Andrew, and I'm sure you've thought of it. For our radio listeners, Andrew's shaking his head with a wry grin on his face because he knows exactly what this quote is. And we will, quote, "We will prove that there is no problem too large for a government to solve, and no concern too small for it to care about." Now, Andrew, we're both with Liberty Nation, whose parent company is One Generation Away, and obviously based on the quote by Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan had another quote, didn't he? There's the scariest words in the English language, that I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And so how do we split this particular ideological atom where you have Mamdani on the one side saying that there's no problem too small for government to care about, which to me, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, it seems to me that he wants to get government involved in every level of your life. Whereas Ronald Reagan, for his flaws, I mean, machine guns, come on. But
deficit.
And the deficit, had the idea that the government shouldn't be involved in your life at every single level. And those are two very opposing views. So, Andrew, first off, give me your thoughts on what Mamdani was saying there.
Well, not nauseating. I watched that thing. I was up all night covering the election. I saw that speech, and that was the main event of the night. And I just wanted to throw up listening to that and watching that. But it's not surprising. I mean, people, from a lot of post-election coverage I've seen, people are surprised by what Mamdani said and that whole, I think, because it sounded like he just did a regime change and he overthrew the government and the mask came off. But it's not surprising. If you look at his campaign, all of his campaign promises, it was promising absolutely everything: free buses, free childcare, free 2S LGBTQIP plus, whatever the case it was, city-owned grocery stores. He offered everything under the sun, and that's at a local level. So, if he's the face of the Democratic Party, which a lot of people say now perhaps he is, then that's going to go gradually to a national level. So that's what's concerning. But at the same time, I agree with what George Will said. He was on, I think it was on Bill Maher, and he said that every 25 years or so, there needs to be some election, city, state, whatever the case, where they introduce some socialist policies to show the young generation that socialism never works. So perhaps, New York City, a lot of stuff is not going to be implemented anyway, but if it were, it's going to fail, and that's going to at least hope to show the young generation of voters, a lot of young people who really were voting for Mamdani, to say, okay, well, these ideas aren't necessarily great. But then maybe there will be the opposite. Maybe they'll say, well, that's not real socialism. Socialism has never been implemented.
Yeah. I've not heard that from George Will. But it does remind me of something that Konstantin Kissin of Trigonometry said recently, that we only really learn from history. We only really learned from the history that impacted our grandparents, if that, or worse to that effect, because your parents tell you, well, this is what it was like in this day, and your grandparents, if you're lucky enough to have them around as you're forming your ideas, this is something that they can teach you. But it seems that this cycle's speeding up, and I think, this is an entirely different topic, but I think it's more to do with we tend to see, we talk a lot about the nuclear family, But it seems to me that has become the maximum rather than the minimum suitable standard for raising a family, unfortunately. But will they pass on the knowledge that socialism was this great evil that led to communism, that led to obviously the place that communism always leads, which is mass graves. So there is something interesting about it, though, because you'd expect New Yorkers that they're Americans, of course, and then they have this, the whole ethos of America is rugged, as far as I can tell. It's rugged individualism. It's what made America what it is today, which is the world's most powerful country and economy. And yet you have, in New York, you have this little pocket of humanity that has decided, let's not go for that. Let's go for the government can determine every aspect of my life. Because I think what people don't understand is that when it says the government, when Mamdani says that, there's no problem too small, that means things that maybe you don't want them involved in. Why should the government be involved in, how you educate your children, for example, which is, for me, one of the chief concerns about where I live, that someday like state schooling will become mandatory, and then I'll just have to move and take the kids somewhere where it's not. So why do you think they've opted for this switch around from what many of us outside of America or non-Americans think is the defining characteristic of America?
Well, first, I would say that New York City has generally pretty been left-leaning for the last 30 years. So Mamdani being elected isn't necessarily surprising. But now, to the broader question, there's this crossover appeal between the brand of Trumponomics and Zohran Mamdani, and it's this populist appeal. I mean, from Mamdani, he tapped into that for a lot of young people. And we tend to make fun of young people and their socialism, their love of Che Guevara that cost $200 to buy those T-shirts. But a lot of young people, especially in today's economy, they try to do the right thing. They go to college, they try to get a degree, they work a minimum wage job, but they can't seem to get ahead. I saw this recent study that came out and it said that the median age for first-time home buyers is 40. 40 years ago, that number was 27, 28 years old. So a lot of people, they feel left behind by this very system. So if it is a system of individualism and free market capitalism, and they see a guy saying, we're going to tear down this wall, we're going to, take, hammer and sickle to it, then they're going to be attracted to that. They're going to find, okay, fine, maybe I can finally get ahead, or at the very least, burn down a system that I cannot even take advantage of. So I think that's why a lot of young people voted for Mamdani, and you can see that with Trump. A lot of young people voted for Trump because he wanted to dismantle the whole globalist system and bring back manufacturing jobs, and offer people what their grandparents had in the 1950s. Wearing the overalls and the steel lunch pail and going to the local factory, working 9 to 5, and able to have a job and a home and a car in the driveway and have some money left over. So that's what. So for the Trump voters, that's what they liked, and for Mamdani voters, the idea of cheaper groceries at a government-run grocery store, that's what appealed to them.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It strikes me as very strange that we have so many examples of how this kind of socialism has utterly failed in so many ways. So I mean, a lot of people quote there's the northern Scandinavian countries and they're socialist, but even their leaders will say we're not socialist. We
exactly
have safety nets. They'll say we're not socialist. This doesn't happen without a free market economy. The kind of safety nets that people want doesn't happen without a free market economy.
Exactly. Absolutely. That's the thing, too. Bernie Sanders, he'll keep saying, we need to be more like Sweden. We got to be like Scandinavia. But the problem is that they're capitalist societies, but they have massive tax rates. They take from the productive members of society, tax them 55%, and then pay for these welfare systems. And a lot of them, so Sweden is not a great example anymore because of that whole migration problem they had and the education. Sweden used to be such a high standard for education in the world, and now it's slowly deteriorating because of their immigration policies, which of course is another issue for another day, but that taps into also the discussion of socialism and capitalism and the high tax rates that you have to fund these types of programs.
Absolutely right. Well, we're going to be back with Andrew Moran talking about what's happening in the broader economy after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.